This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman. It was just 1 day shy of 2 months after the Biden administration missed a promised March 1st deadline, but guidance for the Sustainable Aviation Fuel tax credits was released on April 30th. U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen was testifying before the House Ways and Means Committee the day her department and the IRS released the long-awaited 40B SAF tax credit guidance and modified GREET model.
Today is the day that we're releasing a notice today that will catalyze innovation in the aviation industry and incentivize the production of cleaner and more sustainable aviation fuels. And I think it will make the United States a leader in decarbonizing aviation. So we're announcing the release today of a notice that will provide clarity around eligibility for the SAF credit. And at the same time, we'll also be releasing an updated model of the GREET model, which is applicable, will enable firms to determine exactly the credit that they're eligible for under the SAF. I think it will provide the clarity that people have been looking for.
That same day, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack met with members of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting in Washington, D.C. to explain some of the key details about the announcement and what it means for farmers and ethanol producers.
Entities that are producing sustainable aviation fuel can qualify for a tax credit under Section 40B of the Internal Revenue Code, which is a tax credit that's available for a sustainable aviation fuel produced in 2023 and 2024, just 2 years. It also provides a roadmap for the development of the guidance which will govern the capacity of production in 2025 and beyond. And that's under a tax credit under Section 45Z. All right, so 40B, 2023 and 2024, 45Z, 2025 and beyond. Now, in order to qualify for the tax credit, there's a calculation that has to happen. You've got to be able to produce fuel that reduces this score by at least 50%. Okay? So in other words, the CI has to be 50 or less. So the question is, well, how do you calculate that? There is now going to be what is called the GREET model. And it's a model through which you can run calculations to get a number, hopefully, that is close to 50% or better of the jet fuel number. Now, this GREET model by itself may not get you to the magic number. So the guidance is going to also identify other ways in which you could get additional reductions so that you ultimately get below 50. So what you're going to see is, for the first time ever, a recognition by the IRS and by others that, in fact, climate-smart agriculture, in fact, has an impact, a positive impact on reducing greenhouse gases and carbon storage. And so by bundling the no-till, the cover crop, and the energy efficiency, you get some points under climate-smart agriculture. So, in other words, agriculture's foot is in the door. We're in the game, which we weren't in the game before. Now we are. So that's the structure, all right? So if you're producing ethanol and you use the GREET model, and maybe you use renewable energy, and you use climate-smart agriculture, and you do something else, maybe you ultimately get to less than 50, your CI score, and that qualifies for the tax credit. Now, as a practical matter, not much sustainable aviation fuel was produced in 2023, and very little is going to be produced in 2024. So essentially, this exercise was the beginning of the structure that ultimately we will create under 45Z. And that's the credit that really matters.
Since the 41-page guidance/modified GREET model was released, reaction has been mixed across the industry. I talked with Troy Bredenkamp, Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the Renewable Fuels Association. So, Troy, let's start with what was RFA's general reaction to the announcement when it was made on April 30th.
I think generally speaking, there was some hopeful optimism in terms of what was put out. There was things to like about it, but then obviously there's some challenges and some work to do to move forward. We've always looked at this 40B announcement as a starting point, certainly not the end point from a SAF perspective. They really needed to get something out to see what the reactions were. There was good reaction. There was some pretty tough reaction by some. But generally speaking, from RFA's perspective, there are some things in this guidance that we like, that we don't like, but also things that we're pretty hopeful about moving forward.
Well, it is painfully obvious to everyone at this point that probably no one is going to qualify under this tax credit at this point because it expires at the end of this year. Planting has already begun as far as farmers are concerned. So we're at this point then looking ahead to 45Z. So what is the next steps as far as that's concerned?
So 45Z will go through an entirely different process than what 40B did. 40B was an interagency working group that was developed late December to really put this together, this guidance together in a pretty short time frame, relatively speaking, for the federal government. We were promised it March 1. Obviously, it didn't come out till the end of April, but it's out now. And it's something that we're going to look at hard because it does become the framework, we think, for where 45Z will go. We've been told by the agencies, take a look at this, figure out the things that you like, that you don't like. We're going to be putting out a request for input rather shortly, but then it will go through, it being 45Z, it will go through a formal rulemaking process. And as you know, that includes comment periods back and forth. That includes a proposal, then a final, then a trip over to OMB before it actually gets published in the Federal Register. So it's going to be going through an entirely different program. I think the administration is very optimistic when they talk about having that process done by mid-November. As you know, there's something else happening in November that may or may not slow that process down. But 45Z, for everyone's information, goes into effect January 1, 2025. So the sooner they get that 45Z program and what the qualifications will be for it, from our perspective, the sooner that they can get that figured out and put into place, obviously, the better off it's going to be from an ethanol producing perspective.
What is the basic difference between 40B and 45Z as far as a tax credit?
So 40B was a program just for sustainable aviation fuel. It was a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit. And as you know, that's a whole new ballgame, something that we really haven't ever had before because it was it's a concept and it's a product that is pretty new, obviously. So that's 40B. 45Z is a clean fuel production credit. So that's a concept that's been around a lot longer than 40B. Senator Wyden of Oregon has been working on a clean fuel production credit for a long time. If you think about clean fuel standard, think of the tax credit that might need to go along with a clean fuel standard. That's what this 45Z clean fuel production credit really is going to be once it's implemented. And it's for all fuels. It's for light duty, it's for heavy duty, it's for sustainable aviation fuel. So the sustainable aviation fuel will roll into 45Z once 40B expires. So it's a little more, quite a bit more broadly encompassing than what 40B will be. And it's things that we would hope there's some carryover. The good parts of 40B we hope to carry over into 45Z, like the ILUC score. You know, as you know, the indirect land use charge was an issue that we were very concerned about when it came to this modified GREET guidance that we were going to get from this interagency work group for 40B. And we actually came out pretty good on that number from an ethanol to jet perspective. So that's one of the good things that we like about what happened with this guidance. Some of the things that just don't make sense right now is what they're trying to do with the climate smart ag components. There's a requirement to bundle 3 different practices, cover crops, no-till, and nitrogen management all together in order to get a 10 CI, a 10 gram credit. That's problematic just based on regional differences, climatic zone differences from north to south. And so there's a lot of work to do there if that, and we fully expect climate smart ag to play a role in 45Z, but there's a lot of ways to apply that and to manage that part of this credit system that we would want to see changed before they get adopted into a 45Z program. So, like I said, this is a little bit of a mixed bag. There's some good things in there. We always saw 40B as a starting point. The rubber really hits the road when it comes to 45Z. So that's going to be where we're turning our attention to make sure that the good parts of 40B become part of 45Z and to fix the things that really are not workable.
Secretary Vilsack stressed how important this is for agriculture, and that the key message is that agriculture is in the game as far as SAF is concerned. And for the first time ever, a federal agency is recognizing that climate smart agriculture practices can have a positive impact on reducing greenhouse gases and carbon. And talk a little bit about that and how this is a real win for agriculture and ethanol.
It is a real win. I mean, that's something too that before you really get a real critical eye in terms of the particulars in this 40B guidance. I mean, keep in mind this is the first time ever that the carbon scoring framework is going to recognize, you know, the climate smart ag practices in that carbon scoring framework. So that's actually a very positive thing. We're pleased to see the integration of those carbon reduction practices. Now, again, they kind of took a shotgun approach versus a more surgical strike in terms of making them be bundled together. And it's a pretty conservative number, that 10 grams. If you take some of those practices individually, that CI reduction could be closer to 25 to 30 grams. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of really getting more finesse, if you will, within that climate smart ag aspect to what this could be in 45Z. But again, we're just trying to keep in mind this is the first time this has ever been integrated into a carbon reduction strategy. And from that perspective, from that aspect, we think it's a good first step. But there's a lot of work yet to be done.
Definitely a lot of work at a time when Congress still has a lot of work to do, like an overdue farm bill that we saw some attempts being made to work on this past week. Also, RFA was part of a group recently that was looking to get an SAF provision called Farm to Fly included in the farm bill. Tell us about that.
We are certainly supportive of that, Cindy. We, along with other coalition partners on that issue, signed on to a letter to the House and the Senate Ag chair and ranking members of Congress to say this would be a great thing to add. Farm to Fly would add some definitions for SAF related programs within the USDA department. And so we thought, what better place to add that definitional clarity than in the next farm bill. As you know, the farm bill is a multi-year program, usually runs 5 years, but it's also, you begin rewriting the next farm bill 2 to 3 years in advance. And so as they're starting to think about when are we going to mark up this next farm bill, and obviously we're already past the expiration date, we're into an extension right now that'll run out in September. Congress is really kind of under the gun to get something done here. So us bringing Farm to Fly to them in the 11th hour may not be a successful tactic. Obviously, we didn't know about Farm to Fly even a year ago because this wasn't really on our radar yet. But now that it is, we'll make every effort it is to get it into whatever transpires here from a farm bill perspective. Overall, I think it's still going to be a challenge to get a new farm bill done by the end of this Congress for all the obvious reasons, that being, it's an election year that's divisible by 4, which makes it even harder. But you do have an expiration of the current farm bill in September. So they're either going to have to do a brand new farm bill by then or do an extension, yet another extension to get them over into the next Congress. I would be betting on another extension versus a new farm bill, but both the House and the Senate want to move forward with a markup sometime before Memorial Day. I will be shocked if that was to happen, but stranger things have happened in that town, so we'll have to wait and see.
Congress can get things done if they put their mind to it, but usually that doesn't.
They certainly can, but you got to have vast majority of them all rowing in the same direction, and that is a rare occurrence within the Beltway.
Well, also, the Renewable Fuels Association is part of another coalition that just officially launched itself the day before the tax credit guidance was released, and that is the SAF coalition. And it really, really shows the diversity of the stakeholders in this virtually brand new industry. Tell us more about the SAF coalition.
Yeah, it really is kind of exciting. It was probably 3 years ago. I didn't even know what SAF stood for, and many people didn't. So we have been working with a broad, diverse group of companies, different stakeholder groups that have been involved in kind of exploring what the sustainable aviation fuel and future might look like, from everyone from producers of what future producers might be, so like ethanol plants, but also those companies that would use it, the airlines. We have had more conversations with airlines in the last 18 months to 2 years than we probably had in the entire existence of RFA. And that's because of sustainable aviation fuel. So we had been working in a very unofficial way with a lot of these companies and in a very loosely organized coalition concept. That has been formalized now. Obviously, sustainable aviation fuel is something that's not just a flash in the pan. It's going to be taking off in some form or fashion here moving forward. So the thought was perhaps it would be time to formalize that coalition. So we have joined as a founding member of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel, the SAF coalition. This includes some RFA members that are in the SAF production process, like Gevo and LanzaJet, but it also includes numerous airlines like United and American. And then you obviously have individual companies that are in the biofuel space, such as Poet, Darling, and others like that. So it's a very diverse, very broad coalition. and one that will probably we'll get some mileage out of over the next several years as this brand new product and business line called sustainable aviation fuel begins to get developed and then get off the ground.
There's naturally a lot of interest among farmers to find out more about the tax credits and what's necessary to qualify. RFA member Continuum Ag, founded by Iowa farmer Mitchell Hora, held a webinar for interested farmers to give his take on the release and answer some questions. Hora said he was especially pleased with how the revised GREET model dealt with indirect land use change.
For the last multiple months, we've been thinking that the indirect land use change was going to go up. In the current GREET model, indirect land use change is 7.4 CI points for corn-based ethanol, 7.4. The CORSIA model is a 25, which is the current standard for sustainable aviation fuel. It's my understanding that the California model is like 17 or 18 points. Same as like Canada is like 18 points. So instead of being a 7-point increase across the board, most of these other models are higher. And we thought that they were going to update the GREET model to also be more of a deterrent than 7 points. But they did the opposite. It actually went down a little bit, which just blows my mind. It's amazing. Massive, massive win for American farmers, and in our ability to show that our crop can be a sustainable option to produce these fuels with. So huge win on indirect land use change. Again, always subject to change. Definitely could be updated, but my understanding of it, big win for indirect land use change, and hopefully we get 45Z rules sooner rather than later.
So we can expect to hear a lot more about this topic in the months ahead. For more information, you can always check out RFA's website at ethanolrfa.org. That's the Ethanol Report. Thanks for listening.